Youngmin was angry, while both Senchol and Aran were getting brave and showing off. In the back of his mind, Blackside knew that the situation also benefited him. If he helped, Magyargrok would have a good impression of him, and if a conglomerate like Magyargrok owed him anything, then the reward would have a ripple effect, and he would repay a greater favor. In addition, he also asked for help because he didn't like Youngmin. The young men and his men seemed alarmed by Blackside's movements. He told him to back off and threatened to kill him if he made another move. Blackside smiled and asked them what the problem was and if they didn't want to fight him. Youngmin was seething with anger. In his mind, Blackside seemed like a fool for asking that question. After killing the goblins in an instant and gaining the highest rank in the last round, he wondered if Blackside would be willing to face such a monster if he were in the same situation. His eyes widened in shock. Blackside dropped his side's blade to the ground and told Youngmin to tell him if he didn't want to fight. The four men's eyes followed the movement of the side's blade. Out of fear, Youngmin asked if Blackside would let him go if he told the truth. Blackside crossed his arms and told him to consider it, if he would kneel down and beg for his life. Youngmin's expression lost hope as he realized that Blackside wanted him to embarrass himself while his friends and Orin watched. He didn't want to fight if he could avoid it, but he felt really annoyed. He smiled at Blackside. Suddenly he realized that he was strong enough to break a wall with his bare hands. He thought that if he was lucky, he might be able to send Blackside flying with just one punch. He smiled at the idea with a smug expression on his face. He said to Blackside, "You're going too far, you idiot." He clenched his fists as if preparing for a fight. He patted her shoulder and approached Blackside, asked what she had said earlier so that she would kneel down and beg. Then he asked, "Do you want to die?" Youngmin planned to naturally close the distance between them, and then he would punch her straight in the face. He assumed that Blackside wouldn't be able to handle it, because there was no way a human could withstand something that could break a concrete wall. Unexpectedly, Blackside withdrew his weapon. Youngmin was confused as to why he would put his weapon away. When Blackside explained it, it was a bit unfair that his opponent would approach him while he was holding a weapon. He stated that winning so easily would be boring. Youngmin was annoyed by this and commented that Blackside was laughing. In an instant, Blackside lunged towards Youngmin to attack him. Youngmin raised his fist. He was overjoyed at the idea that Blackside was stupid enough to remove his weapon and expose his fangs. He punched him with vicious force. As he screamed, "You're dead!" But to his surprise, Blackside quickly dodged his fist, and his stomach was hit by a powerful kick. It was so powerful that it sent him flying a short distance. With one leg raised, Blackside slammed Youngmin's body into the air. Youngmin groaned and bent over in pain as Blackside cursed. Blackside told him to stop cursing because his ears would rot, and then kicked him again. Youngmin groaned as he rubbed his face as he was kicked. Blackside grabbed his clothes. He held him at arm's length with one hand and delivered a series of punches with the other. Youngmin took the punches and thought that they weren't fists that hit him. He felt like he was being hit with a hammer. He wondered if Blackside was as strong as he was. He assumed that Blackside didn't have a strength rune like him, so it puzzled him as to why he was so strong. He looked at Blackside's calm but serious face. One of his friends called his name while the other was ordered by the archer to attack Blackside. The archer positioned himself and prepared his bow, and immediately released a powerful arrow that moved really fast. Oren immediately made Blackside dodge the arrow heading in his direction. He successfully dodged the arrow. The archer seemed scared, but he dared to shoot another arrow. Blackside immediately headed towards the archer, maintaining a zigzag path to avoid the arrows sent towards him as he approached the archer. He was already within arm's length, and told the archer that he must have been lucky when he was hunting because he had received a bow. Blackside drew his weapon and told him that it was unfortunate, because he had met him in a fight. And without hesitation, Blackside attacked the archer, and blood spattered the area. The archer had a terrifying expression, and he groaned in pain and screamed loudly as my arm snapped. The two remaining men felt scared, but they assumed a fighting stance and warned Blackside not to think he could mess with them and to just leave. The man cursed at him as he ran towards him to stab him with a dagger. Blackside replied with a teasing smile. He then activated the insignia of death. A red eye mark with a skull in the center appeared above the man's head. Blackside grabbed his weapon. He threw his side with great force and released blades of red-colored air. It hit the man's hips and he screamed in agony as he fell to the ground, blood spurting everywhere. The other man who saw this was overcome with fear. Blackside rushed towards him at an incredible speed. And he told the man that since they had attacked him with a weapon, it meant they had some leeway. He slammed his side again with great force and the man screamed loudly as his arm received a cut from the side. Blackside looked at the man, and he had the insignia of death, As he expected, it had a double damage buff, so he could even slice through armor in one attack. The men lay on the ground in pain and clutched their severe wounds. As Blackside looked at them in his mind, he commented that it had been easy, but it couldn't end that way. He needed to instill fear in them so they wouldn't come near him again. They groaned in pain, and when they saw him approaching them, they begged him to stop and forgive them. He moved his side again quickly to clean the blood from it. The man screamed. Blackside let out a breath and decided he was done with the men and ready to move on. His gaze shifted to focus on something. Youngmin hid behind the tree. Blackside told him that it didn't matter if he hid himself. Blackside told him that there were no exceptions, and he raised his weapon in the air, and a blade of wind slashed Youngmin's arm. Blood spurted out of his arm as he groaned loudly. Blackside told him to stop acting like a child. Ryuman remembered the days when he was being beaten, and in his mind, he thought that Youngmin's wounds were nothing compared to the pain he had suffered from Youngmin and the other beatings. He kept slashing Youngmin with his side, causing him to moan loudly. Sanchol and Oren watched the scene with intense intensity. Sanchol could not believe that Blackside would be so ruthless as to remove 2 arms from an opponent who had lost the will to fight. After the arms, Blackside targeted the leg and continued to inflict injuries. Sanchol watched and thought it might seem harsh to some people, but for him, he loved that kind of calm and fearlessness. His eyes were fixed on the scene as he mentioned how Blackside was caravailing his president. Once he stopped attacking, Blackside asked Sanchol and Oren if they were okay. Sanchol replied that they were, and thanks to him, Blackside informed them that they didn't need to worry about Youngmin and his friends attacking them. He mentioned that from what they could see, the 4 men were immobilized, so it was best to go and vote. They bowed to Blackside in unison as a gesture of gratitude. Oren couldn't help but ask if the men would die. Blackside replied that it didn't matter if they did, and commented that those men couldn't even be considered on the level of animals. Oren was stunned by his answer. Blackside carefully observed Oren's sullen expression and thought that he was very gentle. He wondered why he seemed like a saint in the lives of those rude people. He assumes that he is trying to maintain his public image as a celebrity. Sanchol gets his attention and asks permission to ask. Blackside asks, "What is it?" Sanchol boldly asks why he chose to save those men, because it shouldn't be a problem in the afterlife, even if he killed them. Youngmin heard that and showed a horrified expression on his face. Blackside confirmed if Sanchol's question was related to the fact that he didn't kill them. In his mind, he observed that Sanchol was truly acting like Ma Yongluk's right hand. He replied that the reason was simple. He had nothing to gain by killing them. Sanchol didn't quite understand the part about nothing to gain. Sanchol insisted that, however, it is not a good idea to leave something that could cause trouble in the future. Blackside replied, "Problem." He glanced at the trembling men and answered if those men would really cause trouble in the future. He added that nothing good would come of it if the population decreased, because the number of participants would also decrease because of that. Sanchol seemed to accept that logic, realizing that he was right. If the number of participants decreased, the number of places for those who finished the round would also decrease. He couldn't help but be impressed by Blackside's thoughts on such matters. He realized that Blackside's understanding of the game was different from others. Sanchol stated that he completely understood Blackside, and that in the future, they would no longer pay attention to trash people. When everything was over, Blackside said goodbye, but Sanchol immediately shocked him. Sanchol told him that if he could give his account number, he would send him the payment in the real world. Blackside replied to just forget it as he continued walking away. Sanchol couldn't believe that Blackside was willing to help without expecting any form of compensation. He had already decided that he would immediately report the incident to the president once he returned to the real world. As he watched her walk away, someone could be heard in the Likura moaning in pain. It was Youngmin. Sanchol the killer had glared at him while suppressing the urge to kill him. He had held back since then, as Blackside had mentioned, that it wouldn't benefit them in any way. So as a way of revenge, Sanchol spat on Youngmin, and then he invited Oran to leave the place. Back on the vast field, the players campaigned for themselves to be voted the laughingstock of the region. They all promised that they were better than the others. This led to a fight between the players, with one player grabbing another player by the collar, while the majority tried to calm them down. Another player joined the conversation and declared that people who lose their temper easily have no right to be representatives. He volunteered himself to be the representative instead. Another male player joined the conversation. He was proud that his father was a member of Congress, so he should be the representative. But people doubted him and the information he shared. Their heated conversation was interrupted when someone called their attention. The speaker was nicknamed Mint Chocolate Boy. He reminded everyone that there were only 2 hours left before the voting ended. He told them that they shouldn't waste their time like that, and he urged them to hurry up and vote. One player asked if he had any suggestions on how they could vote for him. He confidently replied that he had a good solution. Everyone looked at each other because they were all interested in knowing what it was. He smiled and thought about how those people had followed his words. He wore a sinister expression on his face as he thought about the players who had fallen for his words again. People had fallen for it again under the influence of his persuasion rune. When he obtained the persuasion rune as his random rune fragment, he was disappointed. He looked at the rune with a disgusted expression. The notification window showed that the persuasion rune increased his chances of persuading the target if they were capable of speaking. The effect did not work on targets higher than the caster. At that time, the rule of persuasion seemed pointless because it wouldn't work on monsters that didn't have the ability to communicate. But eventually he learned how to properly use the rune. When he was on the field, the other players were busy killing goblins by themselves, while supporting each other by sharing strategies. He told the men that there was a woman in a very dangerous situation. He suggested that they stop what they were doing and leave those things behind to help her immediately. The men immediately followed his instructions and immediately ran towards the woman to help her. Mint Chocolate Boy repeated this method to steal the goblet that were on the verge of death so that he could easily reach the 100 kills requirement. Because of that, he thought that if everything went well, he would be the representative of the region without any problems. In the current situation, he told everyone to pass the candidates first. He suggested narrowing their options down to about 5 people and voting among them. The players agreed that this wasn't a bad idea, realizing that it made sense since they wouldn't get anything done if they kept asking each other to vote themselves out. Mint Chocolate Boy started narrowing down the options first. He asked the crowd if there was anyone they wanted to recommend. They should raise their hand and say so. A player who had been campaigning for a while immediately raised his hand, but Mint Chocolate Boy told them that they were not allowed to recommend themselves. If they did that, it would be the same thing over and over again. People started commenting that Mint Chocolate Boy was right. As he thought about it, Mint Chocolate Boy thought that it would be so easy to persuade those losers. Most were lost in their own thoughts as they tried to figure out who they should recommend, since most of them didn't know each other, while others were holding back because they didn't want anyone else to be represented but themselves. Mint Chocolate Boy waited for them. In his mind, he expected the majority to remain silent, and at that speed, the recommendations would narrow down to the standouts. And then a player raised his hand to recommend Mint Chocolate Boy as a representative. Mint Chocolate Boy thought to himself, bingo! The player who nominated him explained that it would be best if the representative was someone who was logical and had leadership skills. He acts like he can't believe he's been nominated, and another player proves to him that it's because he can handle the situation well. He watches them say nice things about him while he laughs to himself and thinks about how another idiot has been added to the list. He acts kind and thanks the people who thought well of him. Another player raised his hand to nominate Black Scythe. He kept smiling as he thought about how meaningful it was to nominate Black Scythe since he had come first in the previous round. Then another player recommended the second placer called Life is a Documentary. This was followed by another person recommending the third spot called Black Dragon in My Right Hand. Mint Chocolate Boy announced that they had 4 candidates. Since there was still a spot left, he asked them if they had any others to nominate. Because of that, he had already finished it with 4 candidates, and he ordered that before they voted, the nominees must make a statement. He volunteered to go first in his mind, convincing these losers would be very easy. He started to speak when someone told him to stop his nonsense. He was surprised to see that the person he was talking to was Region Rank 2 named Life is a Documentary. Life is a Documentary had an annoyed expression as he blurted out that he couldn't bear to listen to Mint Chocolate Boy's nonsense. Mint Chocolate Boy asked what he was doing while Life is a Documentary was calling his name. Life is a Documentary exudes a menacing aura as he asks Mint Chocolate Boy if he thinks the world is too easy. Life is a Documentary asks if people do whatever he tells them to do in just a few words. Mint Chocolate Boy wears a troubled expression as he considers the possibility that Life is a Documentary has already found out about his abilities. However, he also finds comfort in the idea that this may not be the case. Life is a Documentary was disturbed when he asked Mint Chocolate Boy who he thought he was to pass on the regional representative, and he called him an instigator. Mint Chocolate Boy sternly told him that he was going too far. He told her that there is a saying that a person's words are their face and character. He asked Life is a Documentary if it was necessary to choose such bad words. After speaking, he thought his words were working, but he was surprised when Life is a Documentary continued to curse at him. Life is a Documentary appeared very angry and asked if Mint Chocolate Boy was teaching him a snake. He threatened Mint Chocolate Boy, warning him about having a death wish. Mint Chocolate Boy was shocked to see that his ability was not working. Life as a Documentary was threatened by the people around him to forget about the candidates and just vote for him. He threatened to kill them if they didn't. Mint Chocolate Boy used his powers again, and he said how Life as a Documentary was causing trouble. Mint Chocolate Boy asked him if he thought people would listen to him if he said that. He told him to stop embarrassing himself and just turn around. Life as a Documentary remained silent with a sad expression on his face. Suddenly, he slashed someone from the crowd. Mint Chocolate Boy was shocked and saw blood in front of him. Mint Chocolate Boy had a painful expression because he was the one who had been slashed in the neck. Blood continued to flow through his body. Life as a Documentary reminded him that he had told her earlier that it would kill him if she talked to him. Mint Chocolate Boy let out a painful noise as his eyes turned white. His body fell to the ground. Life as a Documentary threatening to kill the crowd like how he killed Mint Chocolate Boy. People panicked. They couldn't believe that Life as a Documentary just killed Mint Chocolate Boy without hesitation. They labeled him a murderer. His blade continued to drip with Mint Chocolate Boy's blood. He raised his dagger at the people and told them, "What?" He dared to approach them if they had a problem. A player pointed his finger at him and called him crazy. Life as a Documentary smiled in return and announced that if they did not approach him, he would be the one to go to them. With incredible speed, he moved through the crowd, cutting people one after another. He seemed to be on fire at what he was doing. He felt so happy and shouted that it was so beautiful because there were no police, reporters, or cameras. That's all for today, guys. See you on the next upload.